week 6 as God had a little bit more to say to us as a church before we move on. Last Sunday was quite the day for me. I had stayed up late on Saturday night going to the movies with my mom and a friend, and then I had to go home and I had to pack because our family was leaving for a short vacation after last week's service. So I was up late packing, up early, preached 2 services here at Southridge Church, and then after the crowd kind of cleared out a second service, I hopped right into the car, and we took on the first 10 hours of a 14-hour trip up to Maine. And started off good. I thought, here's how I'm going to pass the time. I have all the Harry Potter books on my Audible. I've already listened to them once. Let's start again on my favorite one, which is the third one. And so I re-download the third one. We begin to listen to it. And I listened to it for about an hour or so, and I realized after about an hour, I really can't take any more Harry Potter. And so I tried to turn on my favorite podcast, which is the Nate Land podcast. Any Nate Bargatze fans? All right, we're going to have to do better than that. So I turned that on, and I realized about 5 minutes later, I can't listen to that either. And so I'm like, all right, well, Old Faithful, let's turn on some music. And I can't listen to that either. I couldn't figure out, like, what is going on? Like, why am I cannot focus or listen to anything right now. What is going on? And it finally occurred to me this past week as I was thinking back on that experience, because truthfully, I'd never felt like that before. I was like, why could I not just focus and listen to one thing to help pass the time? And it hit me that because I was up late Saturday and up early Sunday and preached twice on Sunday, and then I was driving and I was just too tired to listen to anything. I was too tired to listen to anything. A couple weeks ago in this series on listening to Jesus, I talked about the importance of silence and solitude. And on the week that I was preparing that sermon, I was rereading some chapters in a book that I read in seminary called Sacred Rhythms. It's all about spiritual disciplines by Ruth Haley Barton. And she was telling a story in the chapter on silence and solitude that she was headed to a spiritual retreat center where she was going to be under the guidance of a spiritual guide for a couple of days that would lead her through a silent retreat. She said she was having a hard time wrapping her mind, like she had done it before, but on her way to the retreat center, there was just so much stuff going on in her life at that moment. She was having a really hard time putting everything behind her. She said when she showed up at her first session with the spiritual guide that was going to lead her through this spiritual experience, she said she just wept through the whole thing. And she couldn't figure out why she was just weeping uncontrollably during this first session. And when it came to a close, the spiritual director looked at Ruth Haley Barton and said, "Your soul is tired and battered, and you can't do anything until you rest. And it may take longer than you think." And it occurred to me as I was reading those words a couple of weeks ago that here we are going to spend more than a month on listening to Jesus, listening to God. How do I hear the voice of God? And it would be wrong of me to move on past this series on listening to God without addressing what I think a lot of people in our church and in our world are experiencing. It's exactly what I was experiencing last Sunday, that you may now have the tools by which to listen to Jesus, but you might just be too tired to actually listen. You might just be too, like you might with every good intention in the world want to hear from Jesus, and now you have a couple of tools in your listening to Jesus tool belt, but you are so exhausted from life, you do not even have the energy to pay attention to what he has to say. Anybody resonating with this more than the 2 or 3 amens I'm hearing? Like we're physically tired from our demanding schedules. We're emotionally tired from being bombarded with nonstop 24 hours, bad news cycles. We're mentally tired from the constant inputs all over wherever we're at. And we're spiritually tired because we're so tired in every other area that we have not been tending to our spirits the way that we need to. And we're just so tired. And if we're being honest, we don't even know what to do about it. We don't know what to do about it. My guess is just like my family this past week, you've taken some vacations this year, and they didn't work. Because you came back and you're like, no, I need another vacation for my vacation. Especially if you have kids, there's no such thing as vacation. You're just living somewhere else for a week. You've taken days off of work. It hasn't helped. You've tried to disconnect or whatever your plan was, and it still hasn't helped. And I think at that moment that you start trying this stuff and you realize, I'm still tired, I'm still exhausted. Some of us, we have just went ahead and adopted the mindset that we'll just sleep when we're dead, and that maybe it's actually just supposed to be like this. Maybe the reason we can't be untired is because it's just supposed to be like this. And maybe this is just what life is supposed to be, and I'll experience this amazing thing called rest when I'm dead. And then maybe the thought is, but maybe we're tired because aren't we doing important stuff and stuff that matters? Or aren't we tired because we filled our lives with things that are worthwhile? And perhaps you have, but let me tell you this, it's not supposed to be like this. Because see, God wove into the fabric of creation a pattern of hard work and rest that was not just meant for us to tell a story about how he did things, but was meant to be a pattern by which we were to follow as we live. See, in Genesis chapter 2, this is what we read. It says, so the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. Here's what we learn if you read Genesis 1 into the first verse of chapter 2. God for 6 days creates. He works, he produces for 6 days straight. He makes suns, he makes a sun, he makes stars, moon, land, fish, animals, birds, and finally the crown of all creation, he makes humanity. He's working hard, he is producing, he is diligent in his work. In all of its splendor, in all of its glory, God made it. And after each day, he remarks how good it was. This is the first part of the pattern, and I don't want you to miss this because we can't move on to rest until we make something very clear, that you are meant to work. You are. Maybe not a 9-to-5 job, but you are meant to produce and create and to cultivate and to take dominion over the created order in some way, shape, or fashion. You are meant to produce, you are meant to create, and what you produce, listen to me, is meant to be good. It's meant to be good. Christians, you're not called to subpar work. You're not called to subpar parenting. You're meant to, whatever it is that you do, Colossians 3:23 says, work willingly at whatever you do as if it was for the Lord. It means everything you do it like you're doing it for God because you are. Your job, your parenting, your leadership, your roles that you have in life, you're meant to work hard and do a good job. Because when God worked, he said it was good. See, when we talk about rest, we are not saying that we do not work hard. Laziness is also not the answer. Because rest is useless without hard work. If you prioritize rest over hard work, all you do is take the pendulum from one side to the other, and that's not the answer either. Listen to the way that the scriptures speak about hard work and the role of hard work. Proverbs 20 verse 13 tells us that if you love sleep, you will end in poverty. Keep your eyes open and there will be plenty to eat. The Bible does not look favorably upon people that are lazy, people that do not work and do not produce. The Bible does not have a favorable opinion of that group. Lazy people, it says in Proverbs 10, are soon poor. Hard workers get rich. Listen to what the New Testament has to say about hard work. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 says this, even while we were with you, this is the Apostle Paul speaking to the church at Thessalonica, we gave you this command, those unwilling to work will not get to eat. Oh, what all that compassion that we speak of for people that the New Testament has to speak of. Yeah, the New Testament says if you don't work, you don't eat. Because God, it's not a spiritual thing to be lazy. In fact, it goes on in that passage in verse 11, it says, yet we hear that some of you are living idle lives, refusing to work and meddling in other people's business. Can I tell you something? If you constantly find yourself in other people's business, it's because you need to get to work. The keyboard warriors among us, get back to work. Those of you that can't stop on social media sharing every thought that your little mind ever had, why don't you do something productive with your time instead of getting in people's business? Let's move to the next one. I can tell they didn't like that one. 1 Timothy chapter 5. Listen to this. 1 Timothy chapter 5. I want you to listen. If you verge on that laziness, like, oh, I don't work, I don't produce, I just let other people take care of me, listen to what the New Testament has to say to you. But those who won't care for their relatives, especially those in their own household, have denied the true faith. Such people are worse than unbelievers. Couch potato, don't hold down a job, don't produce, don't take care of your responsibilities. Paul writes, you're worse than an unbeliever. That hurts. So here's the deal. The answer for your exhaustion is not laziness, because the scriptures don't have anything good to say about lazy people. Then what is the prescription for our exhaustion that's keeping us from hearing the voice of God? It comes in Genesis chapter 2, the very next verse after what we read. It says, on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, and he rested from all of his work, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it as holy, because it was the day when he rested from all of the work of creation. This is the pattern that God has put into creation, that following hard work, there is meant to be deliberate, meaningful, and uninterrupted rest. You are actually not made to just go and go and go and go and go. You are meant to work hard, produce, create goodness in the world, and then you are called to rest. Meaningful rest. And the question came to my mind this past week as I'm studying this passage, that if God rested from his work, then why don't we? Why don't we? Like, are we stronger? More capable? Is our work more meaningful? Of course not. Then why do we not rest? Can I give you a couple ideas why we don't rest? Here's the first reason why I think that you're lacking rest in your life, is that you have a severe identity issue. a severe identity issue. One of my favorite movies in the whole world is the movie Across the Universe. It's a musical with a bunch of Beatles songs woven into this story, and there's a time where they're sitting around the table, and this uncle is talking to the nephew, and he goes, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life? You got to figure out what to do with your life, because what you do determines who you are. And I remember the nephew looking back at the uncle. He says, no, Uncle Teddy. What you do does not determine who you are. Who you are determines what you do. If you have bought into the lie that your worth and your value is summed up in what you produce, the type of work that you do, the kids that you raise, the family that you have, the facade everyone else sees, if you have been convinced that that is what means that you have worth and value, you have bought into one of the biggest lies of the devil that will constantly keep you busy, that will constantly keep you exhausted, and constantly keep you ignorant of what God has to say to you. Because you have conflated busyness with your worth. We've bought into the lie that our worth is tied up in what we do. Let me make it very clear to you what the Word of God has to say, that you are far more valuable than what you produce. In fact, if you were to produce nothing, the inherent worth in you would still be sufficient. Inherent in the gospel message is the idea that you are more than what you do, because your right standing with Jesus is not dependent on what you did. It's all dependent on what Christ has done. Your standing in Christ is determined that way, so clearly your worth and value has nothing to do with what you do. And here's the deal, when we're sure of who we are in Christ, we can actually separate ourselves from our work, ourselves from our reputation, ourselves from all the activities, ourselves from what everyone else says that we ought to be as a family. When we're sure of who we are in Christ, we can separate from all of those expectations and finally find the rest that God has intended for us. But if you're always trying to live up to some expectation that everyone else has on you, you're constantly going to be tired. Because I don't know if you know this or not, you've probably experienced it, you're smart people, that chasing the expectations that the world has for you and the thoughts of what it's supposed to be like is a goalpost that actually never stays put but keeps moving. So if you keep chasing after what they said your life is supposed to look like, what you're supposed to do, if I'm constantly chasing, you got to come to realize at some point that you actually never get there. You just keep going and going and going till you finally fall over. And do not miss this. Physical rest that you're looking for, that good night's sleep, it actually flows from spiritual rest. Matthew chapter 28, these are the words of Jesus. He says, we got the wrong one up there. He says, but come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come to me, all who are, can we take that off? Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest for your souls. And the only way that you'll ever find the physical rest is for you to find your spiritual rest in Christ. If you're tired, you might have an identity issue. Here's another one that might be going on. You may be working yourself to death and working your family to death because of the fear of consequences. The fear of consequences. I'll never forget when I was in fifth grade. I was the family that my mom and dad, every Wednesday night, I'd be at football practice from 6 to 6:30. And my mom would walk out onto the field at 6:30, right after all I had gotten to do is stretch and run. She would walk out on Wednesday night, she would grab me and she'd say, all right, we're going to church now. All right, great, that's what my family did growing up. I'm not saying that's what your family has to do. That's what my family did growing up, but I'll never forget one particular Wednesday that I showed up. I gave the 30 minutes that I had. I went to church and come back on Thursday at the next practice, and my friend who played the same position as me came up to me at the beginning of practice to announce. He said, "While you were gone yesterday, I took your spot." I didn't think much of it. A bunch of fifth graders playing football. But I was reminded of that story this past week because I think that might be the reason why some of you are doing what you're doing. It's because you're afraid that you're going to lose your position and your standing in the circles that you are in if you don't try to overproduce and work yourself to the bone. I think there's some of us that we signed up for overwork and overcommitment because we're afraid we'll get left behind. We're afraid our kids will get left behind. You don't use your vacation days at work because you have to prove what a hard worker you are. You say yes to every extra shift and extra project so that you can get ahead and try to be the one to get the promotion. Your kids have to be involved in everything coming and going because if not, they're going to be further behind than the other kids their age. You're afraid to tell your friends no because you're afraid that if you don't show up, then they'll just invite somebody else. So every birthday party, every trip, every single time they call, the answer is yes, we're on our way. Because we're inherently afraid that we're going to be replaced. I would like to submit to you that if that's you, if you're afraid of the consequences of rest, can I tell you, you should be far more concerned with the consequences of not resting. How about burnout? How about spiritual dullness? How about neglecting important issues in your family because you're just too tired to deal with it? Let's not forget this, that our bodies are created and wired in such a way that if you won't rest, your body will eventually rest when you get sick. When you end up with some sort of ailment to where you can't get out of bed. You'll rest, but it will no longer be on your terms. I would be far more fearful of those consequences than the first set of consequences that I mentioned. Here's the third reason why I think sometimes that we neglect rest. Now, when I say this word, I don't mean it degrading. I mean that we lack knowledge. But I think some of us, we lack rest because of ignorance. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if this isn't one of the only, if not maybe, you haven't heard more than 3 sermons in your life that told you that you need to take your vacation days at work. That you need to rest. Oh, you need to work hard, but you also need to rest. So I don't say ignorance in a degrading way. I think some of us have just made the mistake of not prioritizing rest because we simply didn't know how much we needed it. Some of us, we didn't realize that we had the permission to rest. Maybe we didn't realize the toll it was taking on our families. Maybe your marriage is in the shape that it's in because you just won't slow down. Maybe your kids are in the shape that they're in because you just won't slow down. Maybe your finances are in the shape that they're in because you just won't slow down. So, whether you lack rest because of an identity issue or out of a fear issue or simply because you didn't know, let me give you a plan to put into place. You need 3 things if you're really going to rest. Here's the first one. You need permission. You need permission. How many of you, when you take a vacation, when you take a day off of work, you can't enjoy it because you feel like you're doing something wrong? I'm supposed to be working. I'm supposed to be producing. I'm supposed to be creating. But if I'm not there, then who will? No. give yourself permission, because God has given you permission, woven into the fabric of creation, that if you will work hard, then you will receive your rest. Give yourself permission. Some of you need to get permission by having a family meeting where you sit down and go, listen, we're not doing it this way anymore. We're going to start to say no to some stuff. So the way, as a family, we have now received permission to take a nap, to not produce, to rest. Because if the whole family's not on board with it, it won't work. If God set the example, then you already have the permission that you need. So you need permission. Here's the second one. You need to prioritize it. We can't just talk about it in sermons. You actually have to make it a priority. We talked about in week 3 of this series how Jesus prioritized silence and solitude. Even though he was accomplishing a great work and he was in high demand, he still made it his priority. And if rest and silence and solitude was a necessity for the Son of God, then who are we to act as if we don't need it? Rest will not happen accidentally. It needs to be prioritized. Listen, if you're a parent in here, the schedule that you keep, the pace at which you run, is training your kids to do the same. So if you're so exhausted that you can't hear the voice of God, you are teaching your kids to live so exhausted that they can't hear the voice of God. Make it a priority. And then the third thing that you need a plan. Because again, nobody drifts into this stuff. This stuff that's really meaningful, we don't just accidentally stumble into it. We make very poignant decisions that lead us into a certain direction. You need a plan. See, in the Old Testament, the rhythm that God prescribed for Israel was a 24-hour period called a Sabbath that they were not expected to produce. It was a gift to the Israelites. Now, what the Israelites went on and did, especially the religious leaders and stuff, as time went on, they went and added all these rules and all these regulations around the Sabbath. They weren't even part of it, because the Sabbath was meant to be a gift, and instead they made the Sabbath into a job by all of this rule keeping. I don't know, anybody raised in a family like that? I remember, and this is just where we were as a family. It's not right, wrong, or indifferent, but I remember on Sunday you went to church, you came home, you took a nap. You couldn't even mow the grass on Sunday. Right? This is like this. Your time of rest is not meant to be so restrictive in what you can and cannot do. You simply need time in your week that refreshes you and revives you. Dare I say, you need a hobby. And following your kids from place to place is not a hobby. Serving at church is not a hobby. You need a hobby. You need something. You need to go and do something that, you understand, the word recreation is within it says to recreate. That's what God's doing when you rest. He's recreating you. That's why recreation is so important. You need recreation, you need rest, because that's how God is making you into the person He's called you to be. And so your Sabbath, your time of rest, is not meant to be real rigid the way that the Israelites made it to be rigid, because this is what Jesus says about the Sabbath in Mark chapter 2. He says the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not the people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. It tells you that this time of rest that God has prescribed weekly for you is a gift. It's a gift to you. It's not something that's supposed to put more pressure on you. It's meant to be something that relieves the pressure in your life. Hey, I just thought about this. Anybody think that there's something to the fact that Chick-fil-A is only open 6 days a week? And they're doing just fine. But not us. Not us. We couldn't have a day off. How do they outpace companies that are open every day of the week? Because I promise you, if you will find a day to rest, your other 6 will be so much more productive than if you worked all 7. If you tried to produce all 7. What if you could actually get more done in less amount of time if you're working hard from a place of rest than just running yourself to the margins until you fall over? So the Sabbath day is not meant to rule over you. It's a gift from God. So here's your plan. Here's your plan. Find a day a week. Find a day a week that you're not producing, that you're not creating, but you're resting. Find a weekend a quarter. Find a weekend a quarter that you go, you know what? Whether we can afford to travel or whether we can only afford to stay at home, we're taking this weekend off from life. We're going to sit at home, we're going to worship, we're going to read, we're going to recreate, we're going to spend time together as a family. A weekend a quarter. And find at least a week a year where you are not expected to produce. Some will have more, some will have less. How about this? Say no to some of the extra things that you're involved in so that way you can rest with yourself and your family. Just say no to some of the boards and some of the committees, some of the obligations, some of the things that you know really don't matter. Say no to them. What if you just decided, for our family, we want to have dinner together at least one night a week? Wouldn't that be miraculous in some of our homes? That we sat down together and ate a meal together? Decide that at least once a week we want to do that. What if you decided at least just once a week that I'm going to go to bed early tonight so I can wake up well rested tomorrow? What if you make just like little changes to rest, and then you see what God might do through a rested you? I hope that you've been paying attention over the last 6 weeks, because there's been a consistent theme on what it takes to hear from God. And maybe when we started this series where we were talking about how we're going to hear from God, we start wondering, what miraculous thing are we going to learn through the scriptures of how to hear the voice of God? There's been one constant theme. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, so I'm going to give it to you. The constant theme that showed up every single week, that if you truly want to hear the voice of God, you have to slow down. You have to slow down. You have to stop trying to meet the cultural expectations of everyone around you and simply slow down. Because you have no idea what you might be missing because you're not listening, and you're not listening because you're so tired. Because I actually believe that us as a church, we want to hear from God. I do. I believe that you want that. What I don't know is if you'll pay the price to get there. If you'll actually slow down, reprioritize some things, say no every once in a while. Because I've said it in this series a couple different times. This whole series, Listening to Jesus, is predicated on the fact that the God who created everything wants to talk to you. Is that not crazy? Like your mind would be blown if your favorite sports star or actor or social media influencer or somebody that you look up to, your mind would be blown if somebody like that wanted to talk to you. And here when I tell you, the creator of all things wants to talk to you. My guess is if you heard that your idol or your favorite so-and-so was on the phone, you would move hell and high water to get to that phone call to hear from whoever that was. But the creator of all things wants to talk to you. So will you slow down? Will you make space for him? Will you prioritize his word? Will you get around some people that can help share with you? Like, if you would do it for somebody else, why won't you do it for him? Slow down. The Creator wants to talk to you.